Hey everyone, and welcome to the third official KalaVlog. This time I wanted to actually talk about something which sort of ties into the last video I put up, which was the Warcraft 2 retrospective. I talked a bit about Blizzard, obviously, because it's Warcraft. And Dungeons & Dragons was also referenced in the video where I chucked the book. Anyways, what some people may not realize is that there actually was a Dungeons & Dragons version, or rather a Diablo version of Dungeons & Dragons, which, for those of you who don't know, Diablo is another game by Blizzard, which was more of a hack-and-slash dungeon-delving RPG sort of game. And, of course, it was immensely popular. Most of you watching this probably know exactly what Diablo is, and have played all three of them, but, anyways, I thought I would talk about that because the first Dungeons & Dragons campaign I ever ran as a DM, which I actually count, because there were lots of little attempts when I was a bit younger. When I was a little kid, I had to make up my own versions because I didn't have the books or I wasn't allowed to play with, the big kids or whatever. So, but anyways, my first D&D campaign I ran was a Diablo D&D campaign using AD&D 2nd edition rules, which I won't get into the technicalities of all the different editions that exist of D&D here, but there are 5 editions as of now, and I started with 2nd edition back, probably about 10 years old, I think, when I took part in a D&D campaign that my brother ran, which is sort of the first one that I actually seriously stuck with. It was kind of mature enough to play without being too much trouble. I guess I did cause a lot of interruptions and stuff, but I'm digressing. But it is definitely not my favorite version of D&D, 2nd edition. I'm kind of stubbornly sticking with 3.5. I know, there's 4th and 5th and Pathfinder, which is basically 3.75 from what I understand. But anyways, 2nd edition will always have a sort of special warm and fuzzy place in my heart. So, and the barbarian just fell. See, that's the fun thing about unscripted videos is you never know what will happen. Oh man, he broke his leg. It's okay. It actually needs to be glued because I got this years ago when Diablo 2 first came out. So, right after, actually. I think it was the following year, 2000. So, it's a very well-loved figure. Anyways, where was I? So, in 1999, Dungeons & Dragons came out with their 2nd edition version of a Diablo role-playing game. Now, it came out the year Diablo 2 did, so that's sort of why they cashed in on Diablo 2 rather than Diablo 1, or so you would think, because the cover says Diablo 2, The Awakening, but all of the material that this Dungeons & Dragons supplement contains is actually adapted from the first Diablo game. So, makes you wonder then, where is the stuff for Diablo 2? Which they released to sort of coincide with the big release of 3rd edition D&D. Because this 2nd edition Diablo 2 The Awakening book, which was the main one I used when running my Diablo campaign, it came out the final year of 2nd edition, so it was right there on the cusp, which is why, to complete the entire story, as it would turn out if you were going to run the entire story, and by that I mean Diablo 1 and 2, since 3 hadn't come out for, wouldn't be coming out for several years still. So, with 3rd edition, they came out with the Diablo 2 Diablary, which doesn't cover any of the adventure material or story material. That was included in a much meatier volume, Diablo 2 To Hell and Back, which we will look at these more in depth in a moment. But before I got any of these, what I got, which sort of kicked off the start of my planning for my D&D Diablo campaign that I would run, was basically a watered-down version of the second edition D&D game, sort of like a basic version. You know, I don't know. I'm sure some of you D&D players know exactly what I'm talking about. Like the shirt I'm wearing, it's a picture from way back in the 80s, the basic set red box, and TSR, which eventually, that's the company that owned D&D, which eventually was bought out by Wizards of the Coast, even to this day will still release like boxed versions, which are sort of a simpler, quicker to pick up version of the game that anybody can play much more easily, because it doesn't have as many of the more advanced or complicated rules in it. And they did the same thing for Diablo 2, which was the Dungeons & Dragons adventure game, Diablo 2 version. And it was just these two small books, sort of in a box, made to look like almost a computer game. They were really, if I remember correctly, kind of playing off the whole computer game brought to the table, you know, which is sort of kind of what they did with 4th edition D&D, because the popularity of games like World of Warcraft, MMOs and whatnot, really started to hurt the tabletop role-playing game scene, if you will. So basically, 4th edition, they tried to make play more like a computer game, so, which really bugged me. And I know, I'm grumpy and stubborn about it, but... So that's what I got. Digressing again, but, you know, we're here to talk about D&D this time, so... And Diablo, which is, all of them, 3 of my most favorite video or computer games pretty much ever. Right up there, if not actually higher than the last video I did about Warcraft 2. But, you know, if I hadn't played Warcraft 2, I probably would not have learned about Diablo necessarily. Which I have the same person to thank who got me into Warcraft 2 for Diablo, which I forgot to give a shout out last time, and got teased for it. But anyways, yes, thank you very much, Conan, for helping me learn the wonders of Blizzard Entertainment. Also in the box came a Dungeon Master screen, a really teeny one. And if you fold it out, it has all of the player characters that you can choose from for the Diablo 2 D&D game, which are also yanked directly from the Diablo 2 game, rather than Diablo 1. So in this book, that covers the story of Diablo 1, you are still playing as the classes from 2 rather than 1. However, being the DM, I allowed those classes, basically, I just stole from the 2nd edition D&D books for Warrior, Rogue, and Sorcerer in Diablo 1. It's basically the same as Dungeons & Dragons Fighter, Thief, because they weren't called rogues back in 2nd edition, and just a wizard or mage class. So, you know, it worked okay. The cool thing about these, however, is all of the different classes are uniquely designed to sort of fit into the whole Diablo world. So everything that they did, I think, successfully pulled off a very, you know, the feel of Diablo translated to paper and pen. And, you know, you have here, even like in the game, I don't know if the focus is gonna, but you have the life orb and the mana orb, which in the computer game functions very much the same. So they don't call it hit points, and you know, I'm not even sure what mana does in this, because it's not a normal D&D rule, not in 2nd edition or 3rd or whatever. So let's check the rules book really quick. So, because, you know, I'm kind of interested to know what that is. If it'd be something that would make sense in a modern day game system, or if it's just, you know, totally nuts. Because there's a lot of things that they do in these books which are very Diablo-y and wouldn't really fit into another game necessarily. But at the same time, it's all made, particularly with 3rd edition, because it's such a customizable system that they use, the Die 20 system. Those Diablo books are very easily translatable, I suppose, depending on what kind of game you want to play. So, yes, all the rambling. Okay. You know, if I don't find it in a minute, I won't worry about it, but, you know, my curiosity being what it is, it's just not something I really remember, because I haven't looked at these in a long time, and thought it would be fun to pull them out and see if it holds up after all these years. Because I was about 13 years old when I started running this game, and I ran it for about a year, mostly just, with family, whoever I'll play with, especially back then, because I didn't really have a lot of friends who were either interested in D&D, or if they were, it was really hard to rely on them, and we were all kids, so to keep a consistent thing going could be kind of tricky.
Stay a while and listen.
Okay, so it took me a moment, but I had to stop and look because it was starting to really bug me. I was actually quite wrong about the function of mana in this basic version of the Diablo D&D game. And it's actually kind of cool because the other, more advanced books don't actually use these rules. And these rules, now that I understand them, which wouldn't have been that big of a problem if I had actually read ahead, but this is unscripted and I just kind of want to pull it out and pull it out. I just want to see what there is, So, what they do is, in Diablo 2, one thing they added which you don't have in Diablo 1 are unique skills or special attacks that each class does. And these little, player character leaflets is pretty much all they are. Lists their skills, like, for example, the Amazon here has Fire Arrow or Jab, because she uses a javelin, Power Strike, Exploding Arrow, and each special ability takes up a certain amount of mana points. And the higher level your character is, the more mana points you have, obviously. So that's how that works, and that sort of recreates that sort of system of special attacks which they added in Diablo 2. But the more updated versions of the games don't actually do that. They just stick more to regular D&D. There weren't even skills and feats in 2nd edition. It was like proficiencies, which were really vague in comparison to what later editions offered. So, excuse me. But that's pretty much the basic set. It does come with some nifty goodies, though, which I wanted to look at. And it's one of the more standout things about the basic box that I got, which are these, which basically function as dungeon tiles. In fact, that's exactly what they are, but they're a little bit different than the ones you might get nowadays. I don't think the scale is too different from 3rd edition, but they are done for a 2nd edition system. But, you have your hallways and, your rooms, staircases. And then there's also special rooms which correlate directly to the quests in the quest book. Like at the end, you'll find basically a boss room or a final room. And they're pretty cool. I mean, these are really neat. I would like to use them somewhere, even if it's not in a Diablo game. They're just, really cool, I think, Ugh. But, yeah, so. It's kind of a neat multi-purpose thing, because you could use it for several games, because it's not really specific to the point where it wouldn't work. And on those, you would use these tokens, which they have for the different player characters, monsters, and whatnot. They are a little small, definitely for the scale that is more common nowadays, pretty much from 3rd and 4th, and I'm assuming 5th. So. But yeah, the book that really got the ball rolling for my Diablo D&D campaign was The Awakening one, which is AD&D, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, 2nd edition supplement or book, but it really functions as a whole new system because it details out every class from Diablo 2, complete, with their unique class features, totally brand new spells, different from what you'd find in the AD&D source books, taken, or adapted rather, directly from Diablo. But my favorite part would probably be the item creation system. Now, in Diablo, when you find a magic item in a dungeon, you could wind up getting I mean, just ridiculous but awesome names. Like, you may get, let's see, you may get the, let's see, awesome, you know, the awesome bastard sword of the vampire. Or, let's try another one. Well, that's actually for armor rather than swords, but, let's see. The merciless broadsword of the ages. Or, you know, just, it goes on and on. Magic or unique items with, you know, prefixes and suffixes that you can add to them, and each prefix or suffix includes its own unique bonus to, you know, either an attack or saving throw, armor class, which, in, you know, layman's terms, if you don't know D&D speak, you know, it makes you stronger and harder to hurt. I mean, you know, they're just, you know, they're buffs and heavier firepower, shall we say. But it's really cool. It has a whole ton of varieties of different weapons and armor types, some which aren't even in other versions of D&D that I've found, which is kind of neat. I mean, this is the 2nd edition version, but when they updated it for 3rd edition D&D in the Diablo, which is just basically the 3rd edition version of this, minus the dungeons, which you had to get another book. And I think it comes with a sample adventure, but to play through the whole story of Diablo 2, you had to get to Hell and back, which I showed you guys earlier. But this one, for 3rd edition, is pretty much the same thing. It has the same unique weapons, armor, and items, creation tables, but it also updates it to include 3rd edition skills and feats for your characters, and a lot of them are unique to the world of Diablo, so you're going to get spells, for example, that aren't in other D&D books, and whether you want to use them in a non-Diablo campaign, it's really up to you, but there's enough variety here that I think a Dungeon Master could definitely find useful things for their campaign, even if it's not a Diablo campaign, per se. So. And another awesome thing that they did is they adapted the monsters from the Diablo games, too. All the varieties, even the, like, more powerful versions of, you know, like you have your weak skeletons, and then I remember, like, the skeletons would get much more powerful, and they'd, like, be red, and there'd be hundreds of them, and you'd hate it. But it's pretty cool. I mean, let's look at a few of them here really quick. Some of them are quite awesome. And there are monsters in here which have the same name as monsters in other D&D games, but they aren't the same. The stats, if you compare them, are totally different, because these are the Diablo versions. You know, you got your bat demons, and you know, you got the fallen ones, which are those little annoying, like, fodder, basically, for the bigger, meaner demons and monsters. Yeah, sand maggot. Ugh. Because in Diablo 2 you go to a desert region. Spiders, spike giants, undead horrors, which were called something else, like Horror Knights or whatever in the first Diablo game. Wraiths, zombies. It's all there. But it was a good time running the Diablo campaign. Like I said, I ran it from about a year, from 13 to 14, and then the gaming group got broken up because we ended up moving from where we were living at the time, and it was quite a while before we picked it up again, but we did. We all wound up moving back to the same state in the end, and were able to pick up the game for a little bit longer. But that first year is probably the most eventful year, or the one that we accomplished the most in the story. And I say story because while I started off following the books for my campaign, specifically back when I was using this one, because we started and played along basically along the timeline of the first Diablo game. But I still used all these other classes, although like I mentioned I included the basic ones in there too, which some of the players took. And we'll actually go through my binder and we can look at some of those characters who haven't been played in a long time. I think the last session that we did was, I want to say 2004, and before that it had been like several months before we had done since we had done the last session, and before that I think it had been like the year. We only played a couple of, 2, maybe 3 times after we got the game back together, long enough for me to get a bunch of stuff, like new stories that had been sort of swimming around in my head for that year we didn't play. Some of them started, but they never came to their conclusions, unfortunately. But it was fun. I'm glad it lasted as long as it did. I certainly learned a lot. I'm definitely a different dungeon master than I was when I was 13. So there's a lot of things when I go through my binder and look at all my old notes that I did, which there are plenty. It's what kept me busy in my free time pretty much during junior high. It kept me sane during junior high, I would say, too. It's interesting to see how the way I go about doing things as a DM has changed. So, yeah, I think that's really... I mean, I could go on looking at these and talking about them over and over again, because it's, if you're a fan of the Diablo computer games and D&D, which I so happen to be, it was one of the coolest things, because they managed to nail, at least in my opinion, in the books, as far as they're concerned, rather not in the context of my campaign, which kind of went off in its own direction, but Wizards of the Coast, I think, managed to capture the feel of the Diablo games fairly well throughout these different versions that they released. So